Hey you guys, it's Miss Arneson, and there isn't a video online that has what I want you guys to know about controlled experiments yet, so I'm making this one and I apologize in advance for making you sit through it. First thing we need to know is what counts as scientific information or scientific knowledge. Science is special because we have to put it through a bunch of tests. For example, we try to be objective. We try to reduce biases and we try to make sure that when we set up an experiment, it's going to test a specific thing. And then we have to verify that information with many different sources, not just one. So if you do one study, that doesn't count as science. You have to do a bunch and you have to be able to test it and retest it and have other scientists look at your data and say, you know what, that's top notch. They did a good job. Those are the reasons you can trust science, and not trusting science can actually be pretty dangerous these days. Here's a chart that shows you how in the beginning of COVID, this is when everybody had it in really big cities, which generally vote Democratic. Most of the deaths were in big cities, but over time, as myths and untruths about vaccines and wearing masks showed up, you can see that there was a shift, and now more people in counties that voted for Donald Trump were the ones that have the most deaths. And that's interesting because Donald Trump is the president when the vaccine was made, and also he got the vaccine and he encouraged people to get it. But he also said some things that were very misleading. And so, in the end, you can see that more people who are Republican and distrust the science about COVID are dying of COVID than people who are getting vaccinated, which are typically going to be more Democratic voters. So, this can actually be a very big deal in our society. And that's why I want you to know what scientific information is and how does it get found. This is only one way to get scientific information, but if your data is going to stand up in the court of science, you're going to have to involve some controlled experiments, most likely. What is a controlled experiment? Well, I used to get a lot of acne compared to now. And I know part of that is I'm older now, but it really isn't. If I stop my routine, my current routine, then they will pop back up. Or if I try to use something new, a lot of times I get some pimples. So this is how I kind of figured out what works for my face. I got a lot of pimples. I asked myself, will any of these acne products help me? I know there's a lot of them out there. I do a little research. Which are the things that actually have some scientific basis to them? Because there's a lot of different things on the internet that will tell you they help with acne and they actually don't. And some of them have really irritating ingredients that actually make your acne worse. Alcohol, for example, people feel like if you put alcohol on your face, then it's going to kill the bacteria and you'll get less acne, but it actually makes your face overproduce oil and then it can get a lot worse. So you have to have some knowledge about what you're doing. Then you use that research to say, what do you think is going to happen? If I use one of these products, do I think it's going to work for me? Well, hopefully, right? Then you set up an experiment to test if it's going to work. And then you would, do the experiment and collect some data. And then you figure out what the data means. And finally, you have an answer to your research question. So we're going to do a hypothetical experiment in our mind. So we're going to visualize this. And we're going to use this medicine called salicylic acid. It's also called beta hydroxy acid, or BHA for short. And it's a chemical that can reduce acne for certain people. So we're going to test it out. Will this reduce my acne? What do we need for this? Your face, your regular routine. That means what you're doing now that you still have acne, and then the product with the BHA that we think is going to work, and then of course some time. All right, so I've chosen a product here that I use myself. It's a very good product. It has a good pH balance compared to your face, and so this is definitely a product I would recommend. But what you would do in the experiment is we're going to count the number of pimples we have each day for a week with our regular routine. We have to have our regular routine so that we have something to compare it to. Then we're going to add the BHA pads, or these Stridex pads, to our routine and count the number of pimples we have for a week. We expect that we're going to have fewer pimples if this product is working for us. And so that would be our answer to the research question. If we had more pimples, there could be a variety of reasons for that, but we would know that this isn't a product that's going to work for us. All right, we have to put scientific labels on these parts of the experiment, so here's where all of the questions are going to come in on this Edpuzzle. First, we have to have an independent variable. The independent variable and dependent variable are named things that make people very confused. Both of them are going to change, and a lot of times we think that one of them is going to change and one of them isn't. What actually happens is that the independent variable we purposefully change on purpose because we're trying to figure out what's going to happen to the dependent variable. I remember this because basically the independent variable is what we think is going to be the cause of the effect, which is the dependent variable. And I remember that the ID comes first before the DV because I remember that in your ID, like when you go get your driver's license, you have I and then D. So that's how I personally remember it. And we're going to set up the experiment to test if one causes a change in the other. The independent variable comes first. We think it's going to cause something. That's why the dependent variable happens second, because we think it's going to depend on that cause that we're setting up on purpose. The constant variables are going to be the factors in the experiment that could affect the data, so we're going to keep all of those things the same. We want to make sure we have everything set up and we're only changing the independent variable. That's why we call it controlled. We're only changing one thing at a time because we can see if we actually are getting results related to that. And then we have the control, and that would be a trial in the experiment that controls for error. That's why we call it that. So basically, the control is a version of the experiment or a run through of the experiment that you know shouldn't have the effect that you're looking for. So it's basically like if that one doesn't go the way you expect, you know that you have some experimental error and your experiment's not very good. Sorry, a lot of times that happens. All right, so first of all, we're going to try to figure out what is the independent variable. Next, we're going to try to figure out what's the dependent variable. Then we're going to say, what are our constants? What are the things that could affect the data? So we're going to try to keep them the same in every single test. And finally, what is our control? So the thing that we are expecting to go a certain way. All right, guys. So what happens after this? Well, you have to reconsider your hypothesis. If the cream, this is the hypothesis that we would have tested. If a cream or a product containing BHA is applied to your face, the number of pimples will be reduced because salicylic acid, you would learn this in your research, is a chemical that reduces acne by penetrating your pores to kill bacteria. So it cleans out the inside of your pores. You would analyze your data. So if you were right in this case, and the BHA does help you, then your experiment is supported. If you didn't guess right, then it would be rejected. And in science, we're not sad when we get rejected because it just means we learned that that pimple cream isn't going to work for us. So it's not really a bad thing to be rejected in science. It's just a regular thing. And if we can't tell what happened because we had experimental error or we used two products instead, so our data isn't going to work out to tell us anything, it's inconclusive. After you've done all of that, you did science. You're a scientist. And there's a couple of steps you could take next. You will have fewer pimples in your life if it worked. And if you were allergic to something, you could try another BHA cream. Other ingredients like retinoids can also reduce acne. There's also benzoyl peroxide that you could try. So it's not like the end of the game. Scientists don't get data and then it's over. We always ask more questions and try to figure out what's going to happen next.